Okay, meeting started to be recorded.
And sorry, it looks like my video camera just died, which
yeah, I know. I noticed you just switched it off like right at that point, but
no,
maybe it's just conked out.
yeah, no, I'm getting a warning from from Windows that that it has decided to quit, which is very strange because I use this computer daily for a couple of hours of Zoom meetings. So
it's
of course
probably
it's happened
zoomed
now.
out. It's decided it's too late in the night to be having a video on, but you still have a photo, so
Okay.
we're good to run ahead if you like.
So apologies everyone, my camera just died, so I will restart the computer during the break and see if I can get it back, but I don't want to hold anything up right now. So without further ado, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to day 3 of our Research Data Management Services workshop. I'm happy that you could all make it again. And it looks like we've got just about as many participants as last night. So I'm happy to see that everyone's endurance is keeping up with the workshop. So tonight, what we're going to be, sorry, I keep using tonight, I'm in Europe, apologies, whatever time it is for everybody, everywhere. What we're going to be doing is looking at open source business models, and this is in response to a problem that I'm sure we're all quite aware of, which is the sustainability of research infrastructure, which I think is a long-standing and global problem. So without any further delay, we'll go ahead and start our lightning talks. And what I'm going to try to do, I think last night there was some interest in asking some questions before we went to the breakout rooms. So Sarah's given us a bit of extra time today. We can run until 50 minutes past the hour. What I'm going to do is go ahead and try to keep everyone to the 5 to 6 minute range in the talk so that we have time for questions at the end. So I will either send a chat to you or rudely interrupt you at about 5 minutes to tell you you've got to wrap up in the next minute or so. That will then leave us some time for questions. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to our first speaker about the Phaidra repository. Is Raman here and ready?
Yes, I'm ready. I will share my screen. Just
Great.
a moment. Okay, good. Hello, everybody. I will explain a little bit what we are doing at the University of Vienna. And also to tease it a little bit at the beginning, we have not really a clear business model how we run open source. It's a little bit depending on how this project evolves and how it grows. And we are now in the age of changing and shifting a little bit more to getting more professional in the open source business. So first of all, I will give you a brief history about this repository and what the idea behind was it. So this project started at the university. They needed a place where the assets could be stored, so the digital assets. There's something like a home where to find everything and where to store it and keep them safe. And this was all the time before fair data, and all the time before we are in data management. This was approached from the library, and it was a cooperation with the IT department, and also back to this time with e-learning department. This is Center for Teaching and Learning. The first release was 2008. So it was really fast. We were for a self-development. We have a foundation, so it is based on Fedora, but we built everything up to Fedora very fast, and we have focused there on the needs of the university library. and also with their digitalization projects, which they have. So mainly books, but we always look in the way of that we have other assets. We'll have video files, we will have audio files, we will have some kind of pictures and so on. In 2010, we had the first partnership with the University of Padua. So this was in a kind of a cooperation of EU project. And the University of Padua was in this nearly the same position as we were, but they have known that we have this Phaidra and was interested in, and then they installed it. So it was our first approach, and then we have seen that it works there well. 2010 and 2011, also other university institutions in Austria was interested in, and then we run in a little bit of a problem because more and more came in. And so we have really troubles with the architecture behind. And then we built a new architecture. 2014, then the whole research data management come really slightly in. So then back to this time, we are more focusing on research data management, and we see it as a really an institutional repository for research data. We're promoting then this more as open source. So we have also built everything in the way of it's open source. We have an open source license, but really the promotion and also on the community, which was growing, promoting this is an open source project, and CU itself as part of an open source project. This idea evolved more in 2018, and this year we will make our first conference. This is the first PhaidroCon. We had some kind of pre-conferences. As a former, it's not really a conference, it was also topic related, but this year we will call it really the first PhaidroCon. How we do it. So why we do open source? I missed the slide. So we do it first of all. The idea came very early. We always promoting open, and then it was the question why we are not open as well. So doing the same what we are promoting. This is one of the main reasons why we go open source. But on the other hand, is always the question of sustainability. And we're not sure how long will this project run. This was back then, it was not clear how this will fund it from the university longer, because then research data management was not this big topic at the university. So we was thinking, okay, we need also with our source code, if something happened to our developers, whatever, run out of resources, we need to be transparent that the data which is inside of the repository is not lost. And we also need to deal with the limitation of the university. So it's not very easy to get new resources on demand when we need them. And so the idea is bring it open source, build the community, and the developer will come. So this was an idea, but this is a hard work as well as we see it now. So how we do it? First of all, this was something what we haven't done on a pure technical level. We have been connected to different networks, and also to build more networks and to bring the people in. So we have first the partnership model that we bring other universities and other institutions to the Phaidra network, and then have some small workshops and knowledge exchange about data management, mainly libraries, and also we get to other communities, and really the idea is building networks. The other thing is what we have think in the new design, that we need to be more integratable, so that it's a part of a bigger system. So data management should be a part of the whole research data infrastructure, and the part of research data itself, and the data should flow. So it should easily flow into the repository and also flow out of the repository.
And I need you to wrap up where you're out of time.
Oh, sorry. So then I will skip the other things, and I will go to our strengths and our weaknesses. So as we've seen why we do this and how we do it, we are focusing really on not only on developing a repository. This is a strength, but this is also a weakness, because we have been in a lot of communities and we cannot only focus on development. So this is something, we have a sustainable community, but we don't have at the moment a sustainable funding. And we want to bring it now to a model where we also can find some sustainable fundings, how we can also get an income stream. So that's more or less in a short note. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will have time to pick up some of these issues when we get to the Q&A at the towards the after the end of the lightning talks. So I'd like to now move on to the second talk about the FAIMS field notebook system. For that we have Adela Sobotkova and Penny Crook, and I will turn over to you now.
So hello everyone, and hopefully you see my first slide. Hopefully.
Yeah, we do. Yep.
Yep, thanks very much. And Penny, feel free to chime in. So I will talk about the field acquired information management systems project, and specifically our business model development. So the FAIMS project is a project that started in 2012 with Nectar funding in Australia, and we mobilized a community of archaeologists and some field researchers across the world to build a domain-specific, so archaeology and field research-specific platform for online and offline data capture and management in diverse situations, mostly remote, mostly in places where you do not have the cloud or very good computing and sometimes not even electricity. And we wanted to enable researchers to collect clean and consistent data and improve the quality and efficiency of their research. And the final aim there was also for organizations to meet compliance requirements and manage data assets properly. And when we started in 2012, we decided to develop a mobile platform that was customizable, and we were encouraged to develop in the open source model. We also thought that was a good idea, and we had very early on a lot of supporters who agreed with the philosophy of the project, and it won us a big community. Of course, as the previous presentation discussed, we were immediately confronted with sustainability problems, and we tried to even address them at the beginning of the project. But nonetheless, since 2012, we were funded mostly by infrastructure grants, and we tried to convince other researchers who liked the software or the idea of a digital data collection in the field to put budget lines in the research grants. And we also tried to get research income by using a typical open source software consultancy, where we provided the software open source, everything is on GitHub, and so you can compile, you can run FAIMS yourself as long as you have a computer and some skills in Shell and on Android. And what we offered instead was our experience and our ability to model people's workflows in the field faster and develop these field digital forms, we call them modules, develop them faster and better because we had a lot of, because we built the experience. Now, the way that FAIMS works is that you have it's a server client system. So you can run multiple teams in the field. They all sync to a local server if you do not have internet, so you don't need internet. And the clients can manage the software on their own in the field. and we merely help them to map their field workflow. Beginning in 2016, after the first 4 years when we developed the beta and the final release, we immediately started looking at the sustainability of the software. And that's because these infrastructure grants, we knew we could not rely on them. So we signed up and completed the Australian CSIRO on-prime pre-accelerator program and following on-tribe activities. So these are activities that try to help Australian researchers commercialize their innovations. And they use lean startup methodology and specifically strategizer approach, and these slides will be available so you can look them up. The main 3 pillars of this approach are that you test the business ideas to discover customer needs and ensure that development is user-led, not technology-led. So what we found out is that when we originally held our stock taking in 2012, a lot of researchers said, oh, this would be nice, and I'm not going to use it unless this feature is present. And during our on-prime interviews that we ran, we asked questions differently. Instead of what would you like, we asked, what are you currently using, and what do you pull out your credit card to pay for? So that we would discover how researchers were spending their money, what were they willing to spend money on, what was important to them from the revealed practice rather than the expressed preferences. And on the basis of these interviews that we held, we developed new value propositions, articulating how our product could meet the real user needs, and we started producing new business models as to how we can sustain our software. And here's an example of some of those interviews. We usually went in with these business ideas, these hypotheses about what are the frustrations that we are trying to solve. And mostly we started with our own frustrations and we tested them on 70 other people that we called. And some of them indeed were invalidated, such as the first one where we thought the repositories will like it to have clean data because messy data costs money to clean up. But we learned that a lot of data silos don't care what the data looks like. As long as they have something, they tick the box and that's it. So we should not be focusing on them as a major customer segment. And
that you're almost out of time. If you could wrap up, please.
Will do. And so that way we build our value propositions, thinking about who's got the biggest pain and who stands to gain the most from our software and how can we best present our product. And in the end, we filled all of this knowledge into this business canvas and we moved through many of them. And one thing that I would emphasize, this was a long process and every week we sort of pivoted in a different direction. And the important part of it was that we were constantly checking and testing our ideas and that we were discovering new customer segments in a way to maybe expand from our researcher customer base to other entities, such as rather than researchers focus on the universities, and maybe from archaeology move to other domains that have more money and run projects on more regular basis. It was also very worthwhile to participate at the on-tribe activities, such as talking to investors to see what the expectations would be of if we were to truly commercialize and understand a little bit more the world of businessmen. And to summarize the key learnings after those 70 interviews, we also learned about some of the technical obstacles and decisions that were preventing uptake that we now have the opportunity to change since we got another grant. And we decided on a new self-service product to improve the scalability of our business plan. And we learned that from individual academic researchers, we need to focus on the organizations researchers work for, who have a bigger stake in compliance and are more interested in fair data than researchers are themselves. And we are hoping to put all of these lessons into the newest version of FAIMS 3.0 that should be coming or should be ready in 2022. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adela. And we'll move now immediately to Peter Sefton to talk about RedBOX. You there, Peter? Okay, Peter seems to, I've asked him to unmute.
Yeah.
Yep, okay, here we
Sorry.
go.
I'm just finding my screen, sorry. Press the present button. Is that working?
It works, yeah.
Okay, so I've got RedBOX and I've got another project that I'm going to talk about. So RedBOX is a research data management platform which is about planning, what says there, planning, creating and publishing research data. It was started in 2010 and funded by the Australian National Data Service. So it started off with grant funding. And immediately ran into problems because the group at the University of Southern Queensland that created this thing was dissolved by new management coming in and making everybody redundant. So that's a challenge which will recur, I think. And so it sort of limped along for a little while with more funding from the Australian National Data Service, which is now morphed into the Australian Research Data Commons. But actually, before too long, it found a home at the Queensland, so it's a place called QCIF, which is one of our e-research organisations in Australia, in Queensland. And they managed to put together a subscription model for RedBOX. So they have a number of subscribers, which is not on the website, so I can't tell you how many it is. Which I think is somewhere between 5 and 10 universities in Australia paying somewhere around $15,000 a year Australian each, which is enough to keep the software running. And then it proceeds with more when people get money from another grant or they're having a revamp, then individual organisations fund pieces of the software. The other platform which has sort of grown out of this is probably going to be more of a problem. In order to seek more funding from some of the same sources as we just heard about from FAIMS, from the Australian Research Data Commons, we have additions to RedBOX to actually do the archival part of data and to build data pipelines. So similar to what Adela was talking about, being able to construct data acquisition pipelines for different disciplines. And we needed to pull together a whole lot of different standards and really diverse software and give it a label as a platform. So this is a baby, this one, Arkisto. And I've just added this here because it's slightly more problematic. Okay, so I've summarized a couple of lessons we've learned along the way with these, particularly from RedBOX. So RedBOX has a subscription model. It's open source software, and it appears to be quite stable and sustainable because this subscription thing is a recurring budget item. It goes up and down a little bit. We're in a growth phase at the moment, but libraries, once you can get into their budget, it's reasonably easy to stay there. So that has worked quite well. But the problem is is that leadership comes and goes. So I started this project with colleagues, particularly a librarian, Vicky Picasso at Newcastle University in Australia. And we conceived of the product, wrangled the community. Vicky did all the, wrote training manuals and documentation and so on. But if I was made redundant, and so I moved on to other universities, and the leadership then drops off. So that's actually a really hard thing to deal with. particularly when you start getting funding that sort of pushes the product in a particular direction. There was some funding from the Australian National Data Service all about trying to link up services with a service at the National Library for doing people identifiers, which was completely pointless because ORCID was coming along. So the impact of that on the software was quite marked, and it took a long time to recover from the bits of software that were introduced at that point. So while you might have a sustainable sort of raw business model, it's getting the leadership, which is hard. You need a mixture of bean counting, programming, and somebody actually looking to the future and what the product needs to do. And just one final issue, just to finish up. We had this nationally funded, and a number of institutions around Australia were looking at it. One of the big frustrations I had was that some of our larger universities were evaluating using the research data management product, but their sort of IT culture wouldn't let them tell us that they were even doing it. And so they would be evaluating RedBOX, but somehow felt that they couldn't actually communicate with the community. So they wouldn't tell us that they were doing it. And when you found out, they wouldn't tell you anything about whether, what they liked and what they didn't like, which we could have fixed if they'd actually felt able to collaborate. So there can be, one of the issues is a cultural mismatch between sort of IT procurement and open source culture, the way it should run.
Great, thanks, Peter, and thanks for staying on time as well. Now I'd like to turn things over to Tracy Teal from Dryad.
Thank you. Let me share my screen here. Okay. Okay, look good? I see nodding, fantastic. All right, thanks so much for the opportunity to speak in this session and for putting together this workshop. It's such an important topic. So I'm Tracy Teal. I'm the executive director at Dryad. We're an open source, open data repository. I've been in this role about 9 months now. So what I'm going to talk about is really the work of a lot of people over many years. And prior to this, I was the executive director of the Carpentries and a founder and executive director of Data Carpentry. So I've been working in this open source, open science space and working on sustainability for about the last 6 years now. And so I think I wanted to highlight, I think what we're hearing in this session already is that sustainability and business models aren't just about revenue, that they are about the organizational structure and how you make decisions to spend money or build business models. And like we're talking about a consistent leadership that gives you the space to do that work. So I really like to think about sustainability and business models really holistically, because if you're just thinking about bringing in money and not having real established pathways on how to spend it or how to make decisions around revenue, it makes it harder for things to really complement each other. And so that's something that Dryad has been doing over the last 10 years. So it started more than 10 years ago when journals in ecology and evolution got together. They wanted to require more data availability associated with their manuscripts. And so they created Dryad as a place to store that data, essentially. So I really liked Kevin's research data as Apple's model. And so this would have been, let's get together and build an orchard. So maybe like a farming collective there at the beginning. And it was originally based out of Duke University, but then it became its own nonprofit, 501c3 based in the United States. It has a mission and vision. It's driven by that mission and vision. It has a member elected governing board. a scientific advisory committee that is just forming now. And then partnerships with value-aligned organizations. So I guess if we went back to Kevin's analogy around, you know, the plums and the pears and the apples is, you know, as an organization thinking, you know, what you're bringing to the table and when, you know, within that broader ecosystem, what other organizations you can work with as well. And then finally, also we have structures for product development and curation that allow us to be responsive to the user community. I really loved around that lean startup methodology. So really being very user-centered, but then also being able to scale as needs arise, having that structure in place. So over the last 10 years, that's allowed Dryad to have more than 32,000 data publications, representing more than 100,000 researchers and 2,100 international institutions. We do work closely with journals, so those are also data sets associated with more than 900 academic journals. And you can see that we have increasing data submissions over the years, and we expect those trends to continue. I think, you know, as we're having these conversations in this workshop, we're all have those expectations. So sustainability and business models aren't just about revenue, but they're not about revenue. Because I think when we really are excited about the projects and mission driven, you know, we're really good at the mission, really focused on the mission. And I think especially in open science and in open access, we want things to be free. We want to let people use things for free, but there are costs associated with them, and an ability to achieve the mission is by having the funds to be able to do the work. And so I think that's something that the people who started Dryad did well, is around normalizing the idea that data curation, publishing, and preservation has a cost. It's very difficult to go from something being free to then convincing people that they need to pay for it. There's a really great story around the American Red Cross and the cost of free donuts. And so I really appreciate that they did that work at the beginning, and we saw that in carpentry as well around like workshop coordination fees. So that really has been the basis that we can build on. And so now as we move forward, had a reliability on grant funding, definitely, particularly from the National Science Foundation, but now really diversifying the way that stakeholders contribute. So we have data publishing charges for individual researchers, institutional publisher and funder memberships, grants, and then donations. Donations aren't something that we really do right now, but as a 501c3, it is a potential opportunity for us. And so I think, as we've heard too, different stakeholders can and need to contribute in different ways. So having these different pathways has been important, I think, and will continue to be important. Our membership model is relatively new within the last year. We are really seeing institutions in particular aligning with Dryad, but you know, if we're thinking, going back to that lean startup model, if we're thinking about business models, like a kind of a lead to close when you start the conversation to when you sign the agreement or send out the invoices, it's really long with academic institutions. So that's really something I think that is sort of unique in terms of how we think about our business models in this space. And then I'll just kind of make that final point around that we just heard as well around smaller organizations and more limited to participate in some of these IT tender processes. And we have an article that talked a little bit about that recently. So yeah, here for the Q&A. Here's just our product roadmap, our blog, and Twitter, and I'm happy to talk about anything as well. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you, Tracy. And now we'll go on to our final talk about InVideo RDM by Christy Holmes.
Okay, great, thank you. I am just getting set up. Okay. It's been 9 months, so I'm always surprised that it takes a while to get things loaded. So it's really wonderful to see everyone today, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to join you. Can everyone see my slides okay? Okay, great, thank you. I want to give a big word of thanks to the organizers for allowing me to join, and I also want to thank everyone who has been attending these calls over the last several days. It's been really wonderful to hear the work that people are doing. I think it's been a very energizing way to spend my personal week, as opposed to thinking about lots of other things that might be happening in the US right now, so thank you. My name is Christy Holmes. I'm the director at Galter Health Sciences Library at Northwestern University, and I'm also a professor of preventive medicine in the Division of Health and Biomedical Informatics. Today I'm going to be sharing a little bit about the Invenio project and talk to you about how we're thinking about things moving forward. As with everyone, these slides are available, and I encourage you to check them out for details, and then also to reach out if you have any questions. So I'm basically going to be talking about two things on the platform and the community. And, you know, we're working on this Invenio RDM project. Invenio RDM is a turnkey born interoperable RDM repository platform that can also serve as a data index that empowers preservation, credit, discovery, and reuse of a wide range of digital artifacts and data. This in turn enables best practice workflows, and I think in a personally exciting perspective, I find that it also allows us to think more accurately about the activities and people who are driving knowledge forward to kind of understand that research graph. Invenio itself builds on a really strong foundation of collaboration. So I'm not going to go through this slide word for word, but I did want to share a little bit about our own perspectives and why we've decided to move toward this solution. We decided to move from our current repository for a wide variety of reasons, but primarily it came down to two factors. First of all, our existing repository wasn't able to manage large data sets. And then secondly, it didn't support the kind of open next generation behaviors, such as those that have been described by CORE, that we really wanted to empower for our user community. A few of our local drivers are highlighted here in the slide, and you can see that they focus on user needs and user experience, as well as those behind the scenes ideas, such as technical underpinnings that are often invisible to users, but essential for a satisfying user experience. So this slide is primarily just to give you the URL for the project so that you can poke around yourselves and take a look. Here on this URL, you'll be able to find the roadmap for the project. You'll be able to connect with the software and ask questions. And so I encourage you to take a look. We also have a regular blog as releases come out. So definitely take a look. So moving on to the Invenio RDM community, Invenio RDM builds on this strong foundation of collaboration. Development is accomplished by a large multinational collaboration, which includes the CERN Zenodo team, who are leading the effort, our team at Northwestern University, and nearly 20 other partners that represent academic, research, funding, and industry collaborations from Europe, Asia, Africa, and North America. Our work is driven by carefully understanding user experience. Our proactive requirements gathering plays a big role in the approach that we take. And we deliberately incorporate best practices and standards. So we've implemented a number of updates to address some of the challenges to our open source project that have come about in this age of COVID. As you might imagine, there are a number of factors that play into the way that any one individual can participate on the project, which in turn has a ripple effect on the entire project. And so we really wanted to try and mitigate some of these challenges in a way that continued to build that feeling of a strong, cohesive community, but that also afforded a bit of flexibility flexibility for individuals who may need to alter their commitment due to childcare issues or other kinds of factors that may come about because of COVID. So I'm going to share those with you here. Those include, we've made specific updates to the roadmap. What I mean by that is that we've refactored the order in which activities will be happening on the development roadmap. We've now organized our releases so that every other month we have a stable version of Invenio RDM, and you'll be able to upgrade between those versions. This also provides a stable foundation for individuals to drop in development, people who are interested in contributing to development, to be able to drop in, work on a feature, and then know that this isn't a long-term commitment. So it's easier for us to plan around things like this. We have an updated governance model, which is really great and empowering and open and very inclusive. We have a dedicated community engagement professional, which is Sarah Gonzalez, who I believe is on the call and who is also an awesome data librarian here at Galter. So I'm delighted that she lets me tag along, actually, as she's doing great work with the community. We've also been thinking a lot about our end users in terms of user stories and also building on personas work so that we're really looking at questions from multiple directions. A few of those examples that we have from here at Northwestern at the School of Medicine are outlined below. They're very biomedical in flavor, but it gives you an understanding of how we're thinking about these things and using those user stories to help to power decision making. As I mentioned, we have that updated development. I just realized I'm not on this slide.
And Christy, if you could wrap up, that would be great.
I will, thank you. Updated development roadmap, and then we're also, of course, continuing to focus on high quality documentation and supporting materials for implementing sites. So here are some links for resources. Do let me know if you have any questions. And it's, like I said, it's been a real pleasure to join you today. Thank you.
Thanks, Christy, and thanks to everyone who presented lightning talks. So I've got the time as 45 past the hour, and what I might do, depending on how active we are with the questions, we've got at least 5 minutes, and I'd be happy to stretch that to 10 and then give you a 10-minute break. Because I think 45 minutes will be enough for the workshop afterwards. But if anybody wants to ask a question, you can either, I'll monitor the group chat or raise your hand and I'll call on you either with the hand icon or for real. With that, I'll open the floor.
So there's one in the chat for you already, Shawn.
Okay, thank you. I see that now. So a question to Tracy, is Dryad looking at an open access publishing model, introducing a sort of data publishing charge, modeling around gold, open access, APCs? What's your approach? Thanks.
Thanks. So let me answer this and see if that helps. So everything that Dryad all publishes are licensed CC0. Everything that we publish is open. So I'm not quite sure how to relate that with your question. Maybe you could clarify.
Yeah, whoever asked that question, please go ahead and jump in and clarify.
Right. Yeah, so yes, we're CC0.
Hello, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I cannot see the hand raising icon, so I'm sorry if I interrupted you. I just unmuted myself. So hi, my name is Manuela. As I was listening to your very interesting contribution, I just thought that the idea of charging individual researchers, for example, or somehow prompting them to refer to their own institutions to provide funds to publish on Dryad, in a way could remind of the current models through which research outputs are published as gold open access, thanks to the block grants that funders provide institutions with to cover for the APC's charges. Now, obviously, when you pay for an output to be published as gold open access, the output is going to be published open access, which means that it's going to be licensed under Creative Commons. Normally it is CC BY, so it's not obviously public domain and it's not CC0. And for data anyway, Creative Commons might not necessarily be appropriate because there are other licenses, as we all know. But in terms of thinking about charging the individual researcher to publish their own data, I was just interesting to see if you were actively considering the APC model, or it's just a sort of similarity that speaks to me, but nobody else really. Thank you very much.
Sure, I think that there are similarities. So, right, an individual researcher does pay for their data set, but they can write that into grants, so that can come from their grant. But also that's our membership model. We're actually really actively working to get more memberships with institutions or funders, and so that those institutions or funders are directly supporting those fees, and that the individual is sort of never in the loop related to those fees. And then, yes, no matter where that comes from, everything that we published is Creative Commons 0 licensed. So I think that there are similarities, and I think getting to that place where these costs are covered at a more institutional level is important, and we're working towards that. I think that's I think all the people here on this call, working towards those goals is good. Thanks.
Okay, we have another question, and this one's to Raman, and I'm not sure I quite follow it, so I might ask Biru, who asked it, who posed the question, to clarify. So this is about the open source. Sorry, the chat just jumped with a couple of messages. The open source project you mentioned, are you referring to source code preservation for open source software or something else? And I'm not quite sure what Biru's asking, so I would invite you to jump in and clarify if you want.
Sure. So hi, my name is Biru, and hello from Montreal. So my question is, because I joined late, so probably Raman already covered this, and you mentioned that the implementation of this open source project. So I wasn't very much sure what type of open source things you are referring to in this particular project. Is it preserving source codes for softwares, or is it a repository for open source related research projects, or did I miss something else? Yeah.
So no, this is a repository which we can store file-based sources. So the file which came, so if any kind of file that came in, and so if the data are stored in a file, we can put it in the repository. So the ground base is another open source project. This is Phaidra, but this is more or less the front end on all the handling, how we handle and interact with the user in the way of storing, and also the metadata, how to interact with the user, and also to dock on with other applications, and so that the data can easily flow through the whole data life cycle. So that's the main idea of the repository, and also we want to extend it with other kind of repositories. So we are now playing around with something where we can store databases. So this is the way how it works, and it's licensed. It's an Apache license, and you can find the project on GitHub. Does this cover your question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question, and I've got a couple of votes for a particular question from Roland, who was asking about what percentage of requirements between institutions tend to be the same, and when are they different, and what areas are the differences that are most prevalent? And he recognizes this is quite a generic question, so I guess I'd open that to any of the presenters.
So I'll take a stab at this first and then can pass the microphone. So in preparation for the Invenio RDM project, we actually did a bit of a bake-off across different platforms where we looked at such criteria as, kind of general aspects, architecture, metadata, how they align with the Confederation of Open Access Repositories, next-gen repository technologies, how they support dissemination, preservation, the code, and then, some additional information about support and whatnot. And so by doing that kind of a multi-platform comparison, some of which are supported strongly by certain institutions, we were able to look at the way that certain things aligned. As you might imagine, some of the next generation repository features, because they are so new, and are difficult to introduce into an existing code base, have been quite aren't as prevalent, but there are aspects of architecture, incorporation of APIs, persistent identifiers, those types of things that we're seeing are pretty universal.
Thank you.
And I'd be happy to make that available if anyone's interested in seeing it.
Thanks, Christy. And I see Peter has his hand up too.
Yeah, so this is one I feel pretty strongly about. On the RedBOX project, when we started, there was a big effort from the leaders at mainly Vicky Picasso and I, to do wide consultation across different universities and help people to understand things like metadata standards and talk about the trade-offs between having a common approach versus, bespoke systems. And I think that's one of the hardest things to sustain. You can have these conversations, you can get people to agree, but on the other hand, on the other side, when you have vendors involved, there's often I think there's a real, at least in our university, you get this syndrome of business analysts coming in. Every problem looks unique, and particularly for people coming into research data management, sort of new, fresh. They may not understand, best practice, and so it's really possible for developers to go and build things which are not particularly well thought out, and could be, actually end up being quite a trap. So this comes back to the point I made about having, strong, consistent leadership. If you have that, then you can help people to find their common requirements. But in the absence of that, there are other forces like the IT industry who will happily consume people's money building, bespoke services.
Thanks, Peter. And with that, I think we should probably go to our break. I'm sorry, Sarah, were you gonna?
Oh, I was just going to chime in on that. I noticed I
ahead.
can't raise a hand as a host, but like from the DMP Online experience, I think you can often find that there are common requirements. I mean, when we've been working with universities and developing that, there's a lot of similar features that people want, but it takes a lot of time to consult with the community and find a way of implementing something that will work for everybody. And there then can be things that are much more bespoke to, one particular country or context. And I think it can be a challenge, to do that within an open source project and to implement so it works for there, but it doesn't derail, the other usage. So to try and have things configurable in a way that you still manage to keep it working for everybody well.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, maybe when we get to the breakout rooms, I'd be happy to talk. I'm also involved with the FAIMS project that Adela and Penny were presenting about, and we've tried to bridge the gap between sort of off-the-shelf and bespoke with a generalized approach to field data collection. And but I won't take any more time with that now. I'd be happy to expand in the breakouts because I want to give everybody at least a few minutes of a break. If everyone could be back at 5 minutes past the hour, that would be wonderful. And we'll start here and then go to the breakout rooms.
And switch off the recording, so that will be confidential discussions in the breakout room.
Thanks. Okay, thanks all the presenters.